11th contact, Tuesday, April 15, 1975, 3:40 p.m. Block 1, pages 111, 119. Billy says, recently, I received a book titled Living from the Spirit. Is it known to you, and if so, what does it have in common with reality? Semyaza says, no, I don't know the book. But when you may lend it to me, I will gladly occupy myself with it. Billy says, of course, but I first have to ask my friend FIGU, who has lent it to me. Semyaza says he will give you permission, don't worry. But now, I must once again come to speak on your task. I find your work for the spreading of the truth very good, but nevertheless, it doesn't progress well enough and doesn't yield enough fruit. Unfortunately, I had to find out that everything solely rests on you and that you move forward only very slowly. It is absolutely necessary for a group to be established, which devotes itself to clarification work and pursues this intensively. Immediately strive for the establishment of this group because the time presses, for this group will also be determinant for the fact that people can join you who committed themselves through previous determinations in previous lives to be active and cooperative in modern times in this group, with regard to the spreading of the teaching of the Spirit and the truth and for your whole mission. Billy says you can talk, Semyaza, because with us, each undertaking costs a lot of money. From where should I get this, then? I've really already laid out a lot of money, but nevertheless, the whole thing doesn't exactly want to start. And right now, we still shouldn't discuss the determinations, etc. of later group members. Semyaza says I already understand the financial problems, and I know that they burden you very much. But it would be appropriate for all future co-laborers to be oriented about their determinations and to contribute financially to the cause and to act and think somewhat selflessly in these things. In the end, this concerns the truth and the entire development of the earth human beings, to which, first and foremost, the individual must actively contribute in every respect, so even especially those coming members to whom the determinations are inherent. Moreover, changes of any kind are not caused fundamentally by the large mass of humanity but by the initiative of individual human beings who lay the foundation stones for the changes. Those who lay the foundation today and in the future are the actual people responsible for the building that will be built from it tomorrow or in the distant future. Thus, you and your friends are also responsible for what develops from your work for the future. You are only the architectural elements, from which buildings and structures slowly become erected, which must stand in a significant form no later than the beginning of the third millennium. I must say to you that you are a laborer of the Spirit and its laws and commandments, in every relation. Even though you are very skilled manually, nevertheless, it isn't appropriate for you to develop yourself manual organizationally. Ideal organizationally, your mind reaches incredibly far, but manual organizationally, you are subject. This is because you are a laborer of consciousness. Therefore, it is of necessity that you leave the manual organizational area to others. Only bring forth the organizational ideas, but leave the manual execution to someone who is suited for that. In your present stage of development, you are much too busy in consciousness for you also to be able still to expend yourself manually. Moreover, you're not as physically strong as you suppose. Your frequent force achievements of a physical form often exceed your last reserves and throw you down. Even though you can regenerate your strength tremendously fast over and over again through the power of your spirit and consciousness, nevertheless, it is detrimental to your health. Another human being certainly would have never coped with such expenditure because such physical wear and tear exceeds the norm of everything tolerable. It already borders on insanity, in view of the fact that your will exceeds the limits of what is possible for physical achievements, for your will is only driven by spiritual and consciousness-related force. However, spiritual and consciousness-related force is immeasurably higher than all physical strength. Thus, you demand performances from your body, which it is no longer capable of at all. In this state, only your immense power of consciousness, your conscious will, pushes you forward, while your body has already been long worn out and exhausted. Such a struggle means more than just a victory over the physical, it means insanity, for you command your consciousness to do things that destroy your physical body. Just think of the incident when you ran through the desert years ago with the empty water canister. Your body was already long worn out, completely exhausted, and unable to make even the slightest movement. But the power of your consciousness forced forward, by your command, your body over which you had lost all control. Only your tremendous conscious will drove you through the hot sand, while your body had already exceeded the measure of everything tolerable and was a will-less robot of your consciousness and its power. Billy says you know that. Semyaza says I already told you before that we have closely monitored and studied you for years, even if we couldn't thereby ventilate your actual secret, which surrounds you. Billy says all right, but nevertheless, I always had to act in such a way, even in that case, otherwise, I would have died miserably, along with the two others, but let's leave that a secret. Semyaza says that's not quite right, as we would have let you receive assistance, like also in the other dangerous situations into which you ran continually. We have often influenced Earth human beings to save you, when you were completely at the end. But we really only intervened in extreme emergencies, strictly speaking, 3 times. Billy says I noticed nothing of that. Semyaza says you also couldn't do that because we only influenced human beings to find you. Billy says very well, but should I have acted differently in the aforementioned case with the water canister? Semyaza says your action was quite right, and your logic was so sharp that I shudder at it. Only the balance of forces between the two others and you were fundamentally different and to your disadvantage. You yourself had to deliberately condemn your own body and push your consciousness to the brink of insanity, while the two others only had to let hatred be aroused within them, through which they were pushed forward. You had, indeed, also calculated this in advance with your logic. And you were right even if it was all insanity. Billy says let's leave this, however, it is, indeed, all over. What concerns me far more than the past is the formation of our group. I completely understand what you've said about my person, but there is still another problem. You have forbidden me, for certain reasons, to make more photos of your beamship. I have concerned myself, however, with the thought that it would be very useful if we would have slide pictures that we could show for lectures, etc. 1 or 2 more films would also be of use. Do you not want to allow me, nevertheless, to make additional pictures for this purpose? Semyaza says I have told you, nevertheless. Billy says of course, Semyaza, but this does, indeed, concern pictures that we could use for lectures, etc. Semyaza says very well, I agree to that. You can still make as many pictures and films as you need. I will obtain the necessary permission for it. Billy says thanks, Semyaza. But how does it stand now with the film and the photo negatives that I gave to you? Do you still need those? Semyaza says we have already worked on them and have analyzed the phenomena, however, the film and the negatives became unusable through this. Billy says too bad, but what have you found out? Why did the radiation phenomena become visible? Semyaza says it only concerns atmospheric disturbances, which will dissolve in a few months. They come from your system satellite Saturn, which currently influences the Earth's atmosphere. Through these disturbances, particularly the antennas conducting beam and the energy collecting beam as well as the regeneration radiation become visible. The antennas conducting beam and the energy collecting beam appear as a fine line of energy over the beam ship, while the regeneration radiation becomes visible beneath the ship in various hues. Billy says you speak of regeneration radiation. Is the captured energy regenerated again after consumption? Semyaza says the energy only becomes used and regenerated again for the radiation drive. It is not consumed, however, as you said. Our whole technology is aligned toward natural rectification, but not toward destruction. Billy says I understand the natural principle is, thus, implosion and regeneration, rather than explosion and destruction. Semyaza says you certainly couldn't have expressed it more precisely. But now, I would like to proceed again with other things, whereby I would like to suggest to you again to preserve yourself physically more and to expend yourself less. Your consciousness can only endure this life valuably if your physical body is also healthy. Please pay attention to it. But now, I would like to move on in the spiritual teaching. The truly spiritual and consciousness-related aspirant is like a notable artist of a tender consciousness, of a gentle being, full of love, knowledge, wisdom and great sense. He has the highest sensitivity for truth, balance, beauty, and spiritual as well as consciousness-related progress. His life is controlled, purified, and sublime, and his perspectives are very broad. His whole sense is magnanimous, and beauty expresses itself in his simple life full of high dignity. His inner peace holds a beauty which no artist can paint and no poet can describe in words. His spiritual and consciousness-related purity has an attraction force which can't be expressed by any music, no matter how harmonious. His security can be on an equal footing with nothing, and no end to his striving angle can be set by any boundaries. His wisdom is an ever-present light, which shines in the deepest darkness. It is not like a light of a day, which can be overwhelmed by the darkness of the night. It is also not like the light of a great human thinker, which just always fails, often doing this right when he needs it the most. His presence is a ubiquitous outpouring of eternity, which never passes away, while the aroma of the most beautiful and most fragrant rose or orchid of the world fades away and disappears in the times of the endless. It is absolutely untrue that the human being is the measure of all things, for the measure of all things is the spirit. The human being himself is a very multi-layered being, and his various shrouds conceal other parts of his real personality. He can identify well with his coarse material, physical body and can meet its needs, and he can equate himself with the conscious understanding or can feel his oneness with the real self of himself, which is the eternal, imperishable witness of both, but to create himself, he cannot do. All the vital intentions, no matter how valuable they may be in their human places, cannot, in the long run, keep the being of consciousness under their enslavement or subjugate him, without bringing his most inherent personality into complete disorder. In the non-creational thinking human being, the material intellect, with all its given limitations, takes the highest place and thereby has as a consequence a tremendously slow development of the spirit and the consciousness. The spiritual intellect must be developed by the consciousness quite deliberately, for it isn't enough to think that it would move by itself into higher forms. The human material intellect can only move in a vicious circle of possibilities. It always remains stuck on the surface of an object and cannot penetrate into the same and become one with it, for without a complete identity with the object, the knowledge of it is absolutely impossible. Therefore, if a human being wants to know his fellow human beings, then he must be able to identify with these. And if a human being wants to know a matter, then he must also be able to identify with this. The material intellect accepts the testimony of the material senses and the resulting conclusions but rejects the deepest subjective intuitions. Deep insight reveals to the human being the knowledge that there is something more in him than what his usual consciousness mediates to him, something that is the source of all thoughts, perceptions, and feelings, a finer consciousness-related and spiritual presence, which always leaves him unsatisfied with merely material efforts. The doctrine that the usual material state of the human being is not the real and final stage of life, that he has a deeper, more penetrating life in life itself, a true self, an immortal spirit, a light that can never be extinguished by anything, has occupied the thinkers of all times and all universes across all great times over and over again. All great thinkers of all universes raise the unanimous demand over and over again to become acquainted with the real self, the life of life itself. while the bodily organism changes each moment and the thoughts surge up like gusts of wind and disappear again, the real spirit